Together, we have been instrumental in exposing the largest maternity scandal in NHS history.
It is a report about what it costs when systems fail. It costs lives, it costs futures, and it costs families everything.
That's the author of the biggest ever report into failings in maternity care at an NHS trust. In this case, it was in Nottingham. But why was this report commissioned in the first place? And why were the mistakes at Nottingham allowed to continue for years and years? That's one of the things we'll be discussing in this latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and I should just say the first conversation we're going to have on this episode of Newscast might be upsetting, because we're going to talk about this huge report that has been done into failings in the maternity unit at Nottingham University Hospitals Trust. Failings over years and years and years, which saw some babies being really badly harmed or dying, some mothers having terrible, terrible experiences or losing their lives while they were giving birth, and the fact that the leadership at this hospital trust knew that there were problems for years. And so this review has been done by Donna Ockenden, who is the noted midwifery expert. She was delivering her report and her findings today, and the press conference, even just the press conference, was very emotional, let alone reading the hundreds of pages of details about what went wrong at this hospital trust in Nottingham. And my colleague, Michael Buchanan, who's the BBC social affairs correspondent, has been following this for years and years. So I caught up with him to find out what he's been finding out today. Hi, Michael.
How are you doing, Adam?
Very well, thank you. Now, you've been following this story for years, and I wonder if maybe we should start with the beginning, and we can talk about Donna Ockenden's conclusions in a minute. But just tell me how this story in Nottingham actually began.
Well, the review which was published in this hotel earlier on today would not, in all honesty, have come about if it wasn't for two families in particular getting together in about late 2019. The Hawkins family, who had suffered the loss of their daughter Harriet in 2016, and the Andrews family, who suffered the death of their daughter Winter earlier in 2019. And effectively what happened is that the Hawkins had been trying to find other families because they fervently believed that what they had experienced, the avoidable death of their daughter, was not a one-off. And the Andrews family were effectively just Googling to see what was known about maternity care in Nottingham once they lost their daughter. They found an article about the Hawkins case. Gary contacted Jack, and from that small conversation, they found a slightly bigger group of harmed families in Nottingham, and they started pushing for this maternity inquiry, because for years the trust here in Nottingham used to describe each baby death in particular as a tragic, isolated incident. And when you get more and more families coming together who have been the subject of a tragic, isolated incident, you begin to realise that these incidents are not isolated. And so therefore they began to push for this maternity review.
And then when we heard from Donna Ockenden today, the midwifery expert who spent 4 years investigating what was going on in Nottingham, she ultimately had spoken to 2,500 more families.
Yes, there was 2,500 families whose cases were examined by the review, and what they found was that hundreds of families had been failed. Either the babies had died, the babies had been harmed, the mothers had died, or the mothers had been harmed. And you know, to go back to the central point here, this is not something that the Trust had acknowledged at all previously. It was only forced into this independent review through the actions of these families. And what Donna Ockenden said is that they finally deserved the truth and the reasons why this had happened. And the reasons are things that lots of people who have been following the maternity story for years will recognise. It was simply, and in particular here in Nottingham, a refusal to listen to women, particularly women in labour who were at home, were phoning up the midwives with concerns and being repeatedly told, stay at home, stay at home, stay at home, when in actual fact what they needed was some medical attention. Then when they were coming into hospital, a lot of them were being denied caesarean sections. Then when something went wrong, there was often no learning, there was no investigation, which means that services weren't improving. And all the while the families were experiencing this, what became apparent from the review is that dozens, hundreds of staff were complaining about the conditions within maternity care, in particular saying we don't have enough staff And unless you do something about it, then mistakes will happen. The leadership of the organisation, in broad terms, didn't do anything, or certainly didn't do enough. And here we are with all this harm finally being exposed.
Yeah, Michael, that's something that really leapt out from Donna Ockendon's statement when she was launching her report today, which was a very kind of powerful address to the nation, really, was this little bit where she was talking about the culture and the leadership that led to all those kind of very practical things going wrong that you just mentioned there.
Running through all of this is a question of culture. And what the evidence shows is that at Nottingham, a toxic culture was allowed to take hold and was allowed to persist. A small number of powerful leaders described in both family and staff testimonies as having infected the unit, created an environment in which bullying was normalised, speaking up was dangerous, and governance was shaped by self-protection rather than patient safety. Midwives described being intimidated in governance meetings. Junior staff described to us being afraid to escalate. The incident review panel was described as intimidating, male-dominated, and dismissive of non-medical voices over very many years.
And yeah, Michael, there's a paragraph in her executive summary that just talks about all the terrible kind of behaviour on the unit, the bullying, nepotism, cliques. It sounds like it was a quite horrible place to work. And not just that, but it had been investigated on those terms 6 times previously.
Indeed. I think, when you look at the fact that more than 800 current and former staff at the Trust came forward and spoke to the Ockendon Review, which is hugely different, a much greater number than I've spoken to previous maternity inquiries. They were keen to emphasise both that they had been shouting about what was going on in the unit to their managers for years, but also that culture to which you talk about. I think there was particular issues with labour ward coordinators who would form cliques and would often leave the most junior and inexperienced midwife to deal with the most complicated cases on the promise that if anything went wrong, they would be there to help out. But we know from sort of people that I've spoken to over the past few weeks and months that often when something did go wrong, or not necessarily wrong, but when that inexperienced midwife felt that she needed help, she'd call out and she would not receive the help at all. She would then begin to feel that this was not something that she was able to cope with on her own, and further down the line, often the consequences that people would walk away, and the retention rate for staff was terrible, purely because they found the culture so intolerable. And these cliques and this intolerable culture within midwives is something we've seen in other reviews, but it also obviously drips into the attitudes and the experiences of the women in their care. And for instance, we know that one labour ward coordinator used to write FOH beside the names of some women who were often at home or sometimes in the hospital, and she was wanting to move them off the unit. The F is a swear word, OH standing for off home. And so that sort of culture of sort of trying to keep the unit running in a way that they felt they had to, regardless of what the experience of their colleagues were, regardless of what the women actually wanted, was very prevalent for a number of years in Nottingham.
Mm. And I know you've got to know lots of the families who've been affected by this, and I'm sure there are lots of different views about what happened there in Nottingham, and also different views about where they're at now that this report has come out.
There are lots of different views in many ways, but in some ways there is also quite a clear request for them now, particularly they're wanting a public inquiry. They basically believe that Donna Ockendon has revealed the scale of the harm, but what she hasn't been able to do, because that wasn't her remit, is to hold anybody accountable. And that's the thing that the families are now pushing for in particular, because there are no names of any individuals who are responsible from a leadership point of view for what happened in Nottingham. And that's been the same with a lot of these maternity reviews, is that whilst individual midwives have perhaps been struck off their medical register for the mistakes that they have made, no leader or executive at any of these trusts has been held to account. And that is the same here in Nottingham. A good chunk of them actually former executives at the trust actually didn't engage with the review at all. And that is something that's particularly annoyed the families who are saying you can't have this situation where you've uncovered and revealed all this harm, but nobody's held to account for it. So they want the public inquiry and they want accountability, and they believe that if they get the public inquiry, then they will get a chance at accountability.
Because, of course, at a statutory public inquiry, those NHS employees would have to give evidence. They would be able to avoid it. And Michael, in a minute, we're going to be talking to Helen MacNamara, who's been the Deputy Cabinet Secretary for quite a few Prime Ministers. And I'm going to ask her about how she thinks Andy Burnham will be preparing to take over as Prime Minister. Has Donna Ockenden given any kind of pointers or advice or tasks for the next Prime Minister to take up if he wants to address this pretty quick?
Yes, so the current Health Secretary, James Murray, announced in response to these findings that they would come up with an action plan for maternity improvement within the next 6 months, because next week there's another maternity review reporting, and that's one that was set up by the former Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. That's chaired by Baroness Amos. That's a sort of broader inquiry into maternity care in England, a broader inquiry, but in many ways a shallower inquiry as well. So he was saying, look, by the time we'll listen to Ockenden today, we'll listen to Amos next week, and then within the next 6 months, we will come up with an action plan. He also announced that, for instance, a law known as Martha's Law, which gives people a statutory right to a second clinical opinion, that will be extended to maternity care. What Donna Ockenden said in response to that today is that that's simply not good enough. The government needs to act faster. Because in the next 6 months you will get more harm if you allow maternity care to go on as it is. I think the families built up a good relationship, or a reasonably good relationship with Wes Streeting, and they had confidence that he got this and that he was on their side. There's undoubtedly, because James Murray is new in the job, there's undoubtedly questions amongst them as to what he will do. But a broader question is that even if he is committed to it, will he still be in post in the next few weeks because of this pending change of government? So a lot of uncertainty. Yes, the words are heard that the government has said today by the families, but they want action now and not words, because repeatedly governments of different colours over recent years have made similar statements. We will improve maternity care, and that hasn't happened.
And Michael, talking about words, I see that Nottingham University Hospitals Trust has put out an open letter about this today. What did they say?
The Chief Executive of the Trust said today that he unreservedly apologised for the harm and the distress that the Trust had caused over a number of years. He wasn't in post when a lot of the harm took place. He's been relatively newly appointed in 2022 after the review began, and he has got a new leadership team as well. But undoubtedly, he said to me today that he had considered his position because of the sheer scale of the harm that had been revealed by this review. But he did say that he believed for the moment he continued to have the confidence of the board of the Trust, that he continued to believe that they were on the right path, that maternity care was improving, but that work had to be done not just to improve care in the hospital, but to rebuild trust with the wider Nottingham community.
Michael, thank you very much, and thanks for doing this story in such a sensitive way, because I imagine it's a very tricky one to talk about. So thank you very much.
Not at all. Thanks, Adam.
Now, as promised, we're going to catch up with Helen MacNamara, legendary former civil servant who was the Deputy Cabinet Secretary in 2020 and 2021, so knows a few things about what happens when a new Prime Minister takes over in Downing Street, because she witnessed a few leadership changes in that time. And now that she's out of the civil service, one of the things that she does is hosting a podcast called In the Room, where she lifts the lid on some of the things that happened in the many important rooms that she was working in. And the important room she's in today is the Newscast studio.
Hello.
Welcome to our reasonably temperatured studio.
It's lovely and cool.
How's your podcast going, by the way?
It's going very well, thank you. We're having a lovely time, me and Cleo, on In the Room together. It's really good. We're having
You've got
fun.
the promo down to a T. That's good.
See how I've learned.
Also, I mean, I hope you're finding that it's a good medium to really explore things. And you probably find yourself saying way more than you've ever said before.
Yes, and surprisingly comfortable with saying way more than I've ever said before, actually. Who knew?
Which we benefit from too. So, watching Andy Burnham's preparations to take over as Prime Minister, like, what's your take about what's going on and how he might be going about it?
Well, I mean, you've got to feel for the guy, right? It's not a lot of time. Well, I think it's not a lot of time. So if you think it was only last Thursday that he won the Makerfield by-election, and nobody seems to be putting their hat in the ring or having enough MP supporters to be able to actually challenge him to a leadership contest. So the default on is he's going to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom on, the 17th of July, is it? It's quite
Yes, so
soon.
the nominations open on the 9th, close on the 16th. So then
Yeah.
if there's no other candidates, then it's a day or two after that, yeah. What do you think about that timing? Because some people are saying, oh, Starmer did it to kind of stiff him a bit because Team Burnham maybe had wanted longer to prepare, maybe until September.
I mean, you always want longer to do your homework, don't you? You'd rather have a bit more of an extension and a bit of time to think about things. I actually think it was the right thing to do because you can't have a prime minister who can't take decisions and can't do things. It's just, we don't really have a setup in government that allows for a caretaker prime minister or whatever.
3 months of lame duckery.
Yeah, it's not good for anybody, actually. It's unpleasant for the person in the job, the person who's going to do the job. It is just nothing's going to happen. So it's much better for the country to have an actual prime minister who's motoring and can do things as soon as possible.
But it just shows you all the contradictions in our system because you've just said, oh, you can't have a vacuum for too long, but equally Andy Burnham's sort of not got as long as you would like in an ideal world. So there's no answer to that. Is there?
Welcome to being in charge. I mean, there's a lot of the difficulties I expect he's going to have in the next few weeks is basically a brilliant run up to actually what it's like once you're behind that big black door in real life and it is where you work, and there's not a huge amount of optionality. And you are totally at the mercy of events and you're always trying to run your programme and do things, but you're not entirely in charge.
Have you managed to get any hints about what he is actually doing? So we know he had a one-on-one with Starmer a couple of days ago. His team are sort of letting it be known the gist of some of his personnel decisions, like overnight they let it be known that Rachel Reeves could still have a job in the government, but it won't be as good as Chancellor. What are you sort of sensing?
Well, the really exciting thing is, I think it is true that James Pennell is going to be his chief of staff. That is a really brilliant thing for anybody who cares about competent government and proper grown-ups being back in charge.
Why is that?
Well, James Pennell, should
we do a little Wikipedia about James Purnell? So, I mean, we will have met him in various guises through our lives. So I knew him, first of all, as a very, very junior political reporter because he was in Gordon Brown's government in a few jobs, and he famously resigned the night after the local elections in 2009 and said that Gordon Brown should resign too. And I remember that being one of the most dramatic 10 o'clock newses I'd ever seen at that point. That tells you what a quiet era that was.
It was a gentle time. That's when he was Secretary of State for DWP, I think.
Yes, and he was trying to do some quite big welfare reforms.
He was.
I then next met him when he came to work at the BBC as head of audio and education, and he was quite instrumental in setting up BBC Sounds.
There you go.
Kind of like weird irony.
So I knew James first when he was first a minister at the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. So I worked for Tessa Jowell, who was then the Secretary of State. And James's first ministerial job was as a junior minister in that department. So, yeah, which is also, we've got Andy Burnham also, used to be Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport. So my little DCMS heart is very happy. It's a DCMS, finally, a DCMS takeover of government. And I do think that the reason why, there's lots of reasons to be excited about the notion that James Pennell might be a chief of staff, because he's a very deeply experienced, serious person who's got all sorts of things. So he went from being here at the BBC with you guys, he then ran a university, he's now worked in the private sector for a bit as well. So he ticks an awful lot of boxes. He's a very decent, good, proper, liked man. But he's also known Andy Burnham for a very, very, very long time. And I think that that's the bit that, having been in the centre for a long time, it makes such a difference if people are able to draw on real life relationships, not relationships that are political convenience or very new ones. They've got really, really, really deep roots. They worked together for Tony Blair, I think. Although every time I get this slightly wrong, I get all of the special. No, it's not that. That's
okay, good that you've got your own fact checking service.
I've got my own nagging.
And also,
service.
they shared an office, didn't they, when they were very young MPs?
They did, and so they really have a very strong bond from a long time ago, and I think that's a really good thing.
Although I remember in the COVID era, you were very worried about like the macho culture in Downing Street. Isn't there a danger that it's like two lads running the show again?
I wouldn't. I mean, I've known James and Andy for a very long time. That's not really their vibe, so I wouldn't be as worried about that.
Okay.
We only had to hear Andy Burnham on the morning after the Makerfield by-election give full and appropriate credit to all of the women who'd actually done the work for his campaign and been running it all. So I don't think either of them have got that reputation at all.
Yeah, the two MPs are known as the Northern Queens.
There you go.
So many regal metaphors. So in terms of preparing somebody to walk through the black door and take control of the levers of government, whether those levers actually work or not, I mean, where would you start on your checklist of things that Andy Burnham needs to be getting his head round?
So the thing that my former colleagues would say in the civil service that has been really missing in the government since 2024 is an idea of kind of a really clear sense of what is this government here for? You know, it's a criticism that was made for poor old Keir Starmer for a long time. It weren't really sure what his politics were, what his motivation was, what were they supposed to be doing? Kind of not the how of the government, but the what and the who are we here to serve. And I think number one on Andy Burnham's list ought to be, what is he going to say on the steps of Downing Street on the day that he becomes Prime Minister? Because that kind of little speech isn't just a, useful thing for the telly and then go off inside. It has absolutely incredible power in the public service for being able to refer back to it, because you can think, what does the Prime Minister think about this? We had this memorably with Theresa May. She had a really good version of like her speech that you genuinely found useful if you were working miles and miles away from her. You could be like, oh, this is what she cares about.
She taught, her theme was the burning injustices, and then
yeah.
she listed some of the burning injustices in the country as she saw it. And I can say, that's a useful guide for if she hadn't had to do Brexit and all that hadn't gone wrong, that's what she would be wanting everyone to achieve on her behalf. Yeah,
totally. So
it's not just a nice TV moment.
It's not just a nice TV moment, and it's not a moment to just say things that are totally meaningless. It's your chance to really set out. And Andy Burnham's going to have to do that because he didn't win the election. So there'll be lots of kind of like, well, where's your mandate come from? What do you really? You're just the MP for Makerfield. You haven't really got all of these things. So it is a golden moment for him at the beginning of his being Prime Minister to actually say, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is what my government is about. So I think getting the words of that right, making sure that it's not just, motherhood and apple pie, and also that you aren't actually committing to some totally deranged things that 3 weeks later you're going to have to say, well, actually, no, we can't do that, it turns out.
And it's a reminder that, when Keir Starmer came in, he basically had change and working people, and that was kind of it.
It's very vibes-based. I think you need to go beyond the vibes-based into some actual things.
You were talking a minute ago about his remarks, Andy Burnham's remarks, in Makerfield the morning, or not that Makerfield is a place in itself, because it's lots of towns. There's the constituency
well done.
Makerfield, reminder. And
have you had some complaints?
No. I just like to be accurate as a former geography student. Of course. Listening to that speech, if you were then advising him on things that he could then do sort of policy-wise, or announcements he could make, or further signals he could send to the civil service and the country, what sort of things would you be pointing him towards to enact what he was talking about that morning?
So I think the biggest thing, and I suspect this is one of the biggest things he's going to do, which will change the country, is the devolution agenda properly. So he's a man who has been banging on about devolution for a very long time as Mayor of Manchester. He's got more devolved powers than any other area of the England in any extent, and I think he will have to follow that through. He's a big believer in it. It's putting power back into people's hands. So I suspect we'll see some of that, and then there will be. What would
be a good way of doing that? There was like a big bang thing in week one. Because think about it, we've spent so much of our time talking about levelling up and how can you create new pots of money that are easier to access. There's already loads of elected mayors with various different types of powers that no one's quite the same as the other. A lot of this stuff kind of does already exist.
Oh, okay. This is proper in a.
Oh yes.
So it's not exactly headline.
It's not vibes based.
It's not, and it's not headline. It's not headline grabbing either, perhaps. But I would have said.
Yeah, but he'll have to make it sound that way.
He can make anything sound great, Andy.
Okay.
Right? Surely, but like proper fiscal devolution. So devolution of, if you really want to have competitive areas for bidding for growth, then proper devolution of business rates, allowing areas of the country to charge a zero rate for certain industries. If you want a really prosperous life sciences industry, you would be saying, okay, well, in my bit of the country, life sciences is going to be our thing, and we want to be able to have a differential tax rate to them to attract the talent, all of those things. That probably, and I can sort of feel my former Treasury colleagues, shouting at me.
Yeah, because that's a massive loss of control for them.
It's a massive loss of control. But that hello, welcome to devolution. That's what it means, and some of it's not going to work as well. You have to be quite brave.
Which of the potential chancellors do you think would sign up to that? Is that a thing Ed Miliband could sign up to? Is that a thing Darren Jones could sign up to?
Is Darren Jones really a potential chancellor?
Well, some of the papers are saying that.
Oh,
I'm guessing you think he's not from that reaction.
I don't know. Sorry, Darren. I think probably Andy Burnham is so powerful now that whoever is his chancellor is going to sign up to what Andy Burnham wants to do, I expect.
Okay.
And I can't see us doing anything other than some quite strong fiscal devolution. And also, if you remember, right at the beginning of the Starmer premiership, when Angela Rayner was the Secretary of State in CLG, the Communities and Local Government Department, which sort of has control of some of these things, she had quite an ambitious agenda for devolution and power to places. And I think we might see some of that back, and who knows, even Angela Rayner back.
Yeah, and I wonder if she'll go back to do that again, actually, because if that suddenly becomes the hot ticket in government, then she presumably want to be at the hot ticket dispensary.
Do you know what who wouldn't want to be at the hot ticket dispensary? But my little bureaucrat heart also thinks it's quite a good idea to have people who know what they're doing. So one of the big risks that you've got now is that it's much better to be getting used to your new department, understanding your new brief over the summer holidays when you haven't also got to turn up in Parliament every week and explain yourself. But it's a massive mountain to understand what is your job now as Secretary of State for Transport and how does it all work. And the fact that you're probably going to have a whole new set of people is slightly worrying. So if there were opportunities to, I don't know, put a Secretary of State who'd been in that department before back into it.
Retread isn't
retread.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the summer holidays. I hadn't thought of that. That is so there's no urgent questions. There's no legislation you've got to go and launch and then answer hundreds of questions from backbenchers and select committees on. So actually, you do have. It's about 6, 8, 10 weeks even to get your head down. It
worked really well when Boris Johnson took over at that sort of time. Actually, it kind of is a very useful time to be able to just really read into your brief.
Okay, so that's devolution and a revolution in like town halls, maybe. What's another big area you think he'll want to launch? Yeah,
defense. So I mean, that's it's obvious as the day is long, but he's going to have to do something quite big on defence.
But hang on, isn't the defence investment plan, that now infamous cursed document that led to John Healey resigning, isn't Keir Starmer quite insistent that he will finalise that in his final weeks and take it to the NATO summit in Turkey, and that'll be the last thing he does as Prime Minister?
Which is lovely, great, fantastic. That doesn't mean that Andy Burnham isn't going to also do some stuff on defence in the summer, I expect. Because I'm sure he'll want to differentiate himself. And I expect if you look at what Andy Burnham talked about in Manchester and what he was doing, he will probably talk about defence in terms of reindustrialisation. That's another thing that Angela Rayner has talked about before, is actually how do we increase defence spending but do it in a way that massively backs British business and massively backs British business in parts of the country that really desperately need investment. So I think you'll see a much more kind of Britain first, regional devolution, all of those things, all kind of bleed through all of the announcements that he makes, I expect.
I'm sounding a bit like a broken record, but I'm wondering how he will make that sound, A, exciting, and B, that it's happening very quickly, because we all know that doing things like investing more in defence as a big number, actually then once you start to try and find projects that you can spend it on and structures that you can support, or creating new structures, or having an aspiration. I remember they have an aspiration to set up 6 munitions factories, but that will take like 4 or 5 years to do. I'm just trying to think of like what are giant grabby things he can say in that space.
And there are things that come on stream faster than that, right? So if you have apprenticeships, there are things that you can turn on quicker. I also think we really have to challenge how long it takes to do things. We learned in COVID days that actually, if you really want to do something quick, you can. And I think there has to be an urgency. What I fear is that Andy Burnham and his team, with all of this exciting new energy, are going to get sucked into, I can't possibly, and I couldn't, and it takes 3 weeks, and you can't do that before you've done this, and then everything takes years and years and years. They just haven't got time to do that. They need to be absolutely willing to take more risks and move faster. And I hope that because that's that's the kind of arithmetic of Parliament and the time they've now got. They haven't got 5 years, they've got 2.
Yeah.
That's not long.
That's my new obsession, is like, what are the big grabby kind of instant sounding things he can do? Right, I'm just trying to find an email we had from a newscaster who's called Nick Mugridge, and he says, "Hi Newscast, I was just listening to Matt Chorley on 5 Live, and Lorraine Kelly was on talking about PMQs. Lorraine said she'd heard that Andy Burnham might have a London-based control centre and a Manchester-based control centre at the same time. Have you heard that? Is it practicable?"
I think that's in the Financial Times.
Yeah.
As we speak.
I think Lorraine obviously reads the
Lorraine,
Financial Times.
Maybe Lorraine...
Doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me.
Icon.
What do you think about that idea? 2 number 10s.
Doesn't sound like a tremendously brilliant idea to have 2 number 10s, if that's what it is. If his idea is he wants to keep some of his excellent team who live in Manchester doing excellent work for his excellent government now he's Prime Minister, great idea, actually.
Because we've kind of already got that for the Treasury, haven't we? They've got a base in Darlington.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of government departments who are up in Manchester and all over the country anyway. So I'm all for, in general, can you take power away from London? I think creating 2 number 10s and putting one of them in Manchester is not a good idea. And I would move Parliament. That's my... I wouldn't... this might, bear with me, 'cause
Okay.
this might sound a bit crackers. And everybody thought this was Boris Johnson's mad idea. And actually, it was I
yours.
should confess, it was my mad idea.
Really?
Yeah, because...
And what, you suggested it to him and he ran with it?
Yeah, and we did quite a lot of... So this is that...
Actually, no, people used to think it was a Dominic Cummings harebrained idea, and it was a threat to the Lords if they didn't do what the Tories wanted.
I don't think so. The plan was the Parliament definitely needs restoring and renewing. So they do have to move out of that place, or it's something that has to happen quite soon. So if they're going to move out of it, why not move the House of Lords to York? It was and
that was your idea.
Yeah, because it's a really good idea, Adam. Because you've got to
I love York.
You've got to. York is actually the centre of the United Kingdom, not London. I had quite a lot of fun. I'm from Yorkshire, so I had quite a lot of fun explaining that to people. That actually
was York ever our capital? Like 1,000 years ago?
Of course, naturally. There was a Roman emperor crowned in York, actually. But I do think there are really big symbolic things that Prime Minister Andy Burnham could do that are real about moving power around, not kind of slightly opening a secondary office somewhere else, but actually what do you really do that changes the power dynamics? Now, I suspect that moving the House of Lords to York is not on the agenda. But I do think they need to be thinking about really, really big symbolic things that send the signal that he wants to make change happen.
So maybe a whole government department?
Yeah, and Parliament...
Like DCMS?
Maybe DCMS.
Loads of sport in Manchester?
Yeah, the Olympics in the north is what we need as well. I think the Parliament is the problem, though, right? Because Parliament is in SW1. So you have to do something where decision-making is genuinely outside of SW1, I think.
Interesting. And you've got, I'm just trying to think how many MPs there are in York. I think is there 4 roughly?
Yeah,
4? So that's 4 MPs who'll be fine with it, leaving you with 646
well, I wouldn't
others.
I wouldn't move the Commons, I'd move the Lords.
Yeah.
I think that's
800 plus.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't a very popular idea. So
also a very big train bill, because they'd all be claiming expenses for trains.
Very big train bill.
Live here.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
It does sound like you're an Andy Burnham and also by extension James Purnell fan. And you're sounding quite positive about how it might go. Do you have any concerns? Has anything happened that made you think, oh, I'm not sure?
I worried a bit about that photo on the first day. So I don't know if you remember. So if you were just a normal person watching telly, you had crying Keir Starmer.
Yeah, literally
crying, which is a horrible, horrible thing to see. And then at the same time, you had these wildly overexcitable, grinning MPs on the steps of Westminster Hall in their hundreds, all obviously
including Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, it was,
and also Steve Reid. Who had been Starmer's biggest defender on the airwaves for the 3 weeks preceding.
He gets a special prize because he was very close to the front of that photo, and I just thought that is crass. So that's the only thing that I've seen that I think, wow, I get that you're all really excited about this, but can you also behave with a bit of dignity and seriousness? And I worry a bit, like you would do with any political parties that you've seen up close, that there'll be a bit too much score settling and blaming and all of those things, when actually we really do need, even people who aren't supporters of any particular party can see that we need a government that functions really well. We need a government that's working really well. And I hope that they can, all, as Wes Streeting said he would, all pull in the same direction. Whether that holds when there aren't 470 jobs that can be given to everybody.
Well, yes, because that's the other thing about that. And obviously Labour would say, oh, hang on, we do this every time we win a by-election and we get together on those steps and take a picture. But I take your point that the same tradition can feel very different in different circumstances.
And also, you're a close observer. How many times have you seen that many people on the steps of Westminster Hall after
maybe not that many, but no. I've definitely seen the tradition play out, but maybe not to quite that extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also just that point about winning. You've seen a lot of winners up close, and you've seen what victory does to politicians. They love it, and sometimes I wonder if they go a little bit mad because it's such an unnatural, unhuman thing to experience. Yeah,
and I think the sad thing about being Prime Minister is it doesn't really take very long for the shine to wear off that, because even in the process of just deciding who gets which job, you've got to disappoint a lot of people. You'll have people who are grumpy with you. Most decisions you are making if you're Prime Minister are going to upset somebody. If it was an easy decision and the answer is yes, that's being made somewhere else. Somebody else is having the fun of that. That's the Secretary of State or a junior minister or somebody else. You only do difficult things if you're the Prime Minister. So the relentless reality of having to actually choose X rather than Y, and actually this is going to be good for housing, but it's going to be terrible for the environment, or it's going to be good for transport, but it's going to be terrible for skills. Those are the choices and trade-offs. So the actual brutal reality of that being the job. I mean, yeah, there's lots of great things about it, and lots of people want to do it, but it's not a kind of fun upside, which of the lovely things shall I do today kind of jobs.
Here's another kind of nerd policy question. We've all got very used to hearing about the BE network in Manchester. So
Yes.
Integrated bus network that was taken back into kind of public control, not necessarily public ownership, but public control. And the BE network in Manchester, everyone loves it now. What is a way of rolling out that sort of thing on a massive scale so that more people feel that sort of transport revolution? If you were having to design a nationwide or maybe an England-wide policy for that, what would you be looking at?
Wow, that's quite a question. I think it probably is buses, actually, our old favourite. There's a lot of the bus network that just doesn't exist anymore. And if you wanted to make people feel happy, particularly in rural areas where people feel like the world is not designed around them because every public service is in cities and it's all... If you could just flood the country with, cheap buses, maybe electric ones to keep Ed happy.
And of
that
course,
would help.
Boris Johnson had a big nationwide bus plan. So there's a plan on the shelf that didn't really get implemented.
Yeah, it's probably oven ready. Boris.
Oven ready. And this week of all weeks, 10th anniversary of the Brexit referendum. Yeah, that's interesting. I also wonder if there's a few other things, not necessarily on the shelf, but already happening that Andy Burnham can maybe take, package up and rebrand. So, for example, GB Railways turning it into a sort of unified railway network instead of all these different franchises.
Or just put some bees on it, basically.
Yeah, and it's like that's already happening.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he could maybe take that and take some credit for that and maybe rebrand it or boost the branding a bit.
There's a world in which he's very lucky.
And also, and then GB Energy, which is actually
yeah.
only set up to invest in energy projects, but could that turn into something that seems a little bit more consumer facing?
Yeah, absolutely. And he's quite probably inheriting something where the numbers are all going in the right direction. So sort of the opposite of Keir Starmer's beginning to his term. So migration numbers are, which everyone cares about, are falling really significantly. The growth figures are actually a bit more encouraging than expected. I mean, still not good, but there's a world in which actually he's luckier than most.
Do you think there's a world where Keir Starmer gets kept on as Foreign Secretary?
I can't see that happening. I think it's pretty weird if you've been the Prime Minister. I mean, the poor guy probably needs a break apart from anything else. So I would definitely prescribe that.
Yeah.
And it's pretty weird if you've been Prime Minister to then be hanging around the cabinet table in the wrong place.
And are there any things around the machinery of government, like the setup of the cabinet table, for example, the number of departments that you think actually have been crying out for change for ages, and this could be the opportunity to do it? And Andy Burnham might seem like the guy who would do it.
So, one of the funny things was because of the Brexit anniversary and various things, I found one of my old photographs from when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, and he had so many people around the cabinet table that we had to get one of those, Christmas dinner time when you have the extra table and the extra table and the smaller chairs.
Yeah, go around to your grand's
Yeah,
house,
exactly. And if it's not quite the matching tablecloth, that's what we had to. So I think that there is definitely a space for trying to have as small a focus in his cabinet as possible. That actually the time he's going to be most popular and have the most power is right at the beginning. So can he have the necessary brutality to really make sure that he's got right people in the right jobs? I think one of the things that is absolutely crying out for change is Whitehall itself. Everybody says that. The current Prime Minister says it. I'm sure Andy Burnham will say it. The Cabinet Secretary herself says that actually this needs to happen. And that would make a really big difference. I think it's not just about reducing the size of the state. It's about making it much more effective. It's about changing some of the dynamics about how these things work. I think that's ripe for the doing. Actually rewiring the state, very good idea.
Oh, we could talk for hours and hours and hours. You mentioned the Cabinet Secretary, Antonia Romeo. Will she be sitting down with Andy Burnham and having quite candid conversations with him about what he wants to do and how she can help? And the reason I asked that question in that way is I remember when Liz Truss took over as Prime Minister, and she says the access talks that she had with the civil service were quite weird in that they didn't flag up any pitfalls to her. They were only answering very factual questions in a very factual way.
Really?
That's what she said.
Obviously, I can't comment on.
You weren't.
I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I wasn't there. I know that when we did the same thing with Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt when Theresa May was standing down, we offered to both Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson. Obviously, Boris Johnson took more of our ask up, and I spent a long time with them, telling them where we were. We didn't hold back on the problems, and we worked quite closely with them before they came into power, the whole team, on exactly what it was going to look like, what his diary was going to be, all of the kind of relentlessly practical things, but also some really big, you are going to have to decide whether it is X or Y, and that's going to be in your in tray. So I would expect that the Cabinet Secretary, now that the Prime Minister has said those talks can go ahead, will be doing exactly that. And that's partly where Andy Burnham's team need to focus on the what is our government here for and the politics, and not slightly get distracted into the bits that the civil service will be really good at, which,
Oh, let's talk about these processes, Minister.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than the decisions themselves.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I don't know Antonia Romeo, the Cabinet Secretary, but she doesn't strike me as a very kind of like, yes, Minister, I'll try and pull the wool over your eyes kind of person.
She's not. No, and she'll be very ambitious for what a Prime Minister can do and what the government can do and how she can make sure that the civil service can deliver for the new Prime Minister from day one.
Can the fiscal rules be tweaked in a way that lets the government do more but doesn't make the bond markets feel that the government's getting out of control with its borrowing?
Yes, because the Treasury are very skilled. And there are plenty of ways in which you can. It's all about confidence. I mean, so your bond markets and city question is actually all about that mercurial thing of confidence.
Yeah.
And so things like, it sounds silly, but actually James Pennell as the Chief of Staff is a massive confidence-inspiring thing. That the more that Andy Burnham looks like he's going to govern in a very serious way, you saw Andy Burnham in a suit and tie, which I hadn't had money on.
Wasn't a great suit, though, I have to say. I'm no expert.
I was a bit sad about
that.
I thought, come on, surely.
Well, there's a dress code in the Commons, so he had to.
Is there?
Yeah, gentlemen have to wear a tie and a jacket in the Commons. It's the rules.
Do you know, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Maybe he can change that too.
Good job you weren't. Good job you weren't advising the Prime Minister on that.
Well, I very rarely.
Just turn up in a tracksuit for us.
I very rarely dressed people I work for. Everyone should be pleased to know.
Oh yeah, so there's actually quite a lot more room for manoeuvre in the fiscal rules and around the fiscal rules, as long as our lenders think you're a serious person and you're credible.
Entirely, and it's like
so we shouldn't get too fixated on the actual words of the fiscal rules.
Well, to believe that is almost exactly the wrong mindset, which gets us into a pickle in the first place, because it's not that the people who are expressing confidence or not in our country by buying or not buying our bonds are looking at paragraph 3 of subsection 7 of whatever clause and saying, well, actually, technically, this is whatever. It's about, do they believe that this is a government that is going to be able to competently govern so that you're going to get your money back in the future? It's much more, I mean, I would say this, I'm not a treasury person, but it's more simple than it looks, which is about confidence. Are people confident this is a government that's going to deliver, it's going to do the things it wants to do, it's going to do with the necessary radicalism and with an open-mindedness towards actual economic growth?
And also, when it comes to reforming the benefit system, well, Stephen Timms, one of the welfare ministers, is already doing a big review about disability and when it talks about reforming the benefit system, Stephen Timms, one of the ministers in that department, is already doing a big review about reforming incapacity benefits and benefits for people who've got disabilities, which was a product of the fiasco over the welfare cuts. So actually, again, there's something that's going to be on the shelf quite soon that Andy Burnham can pull down and do. Exactly.
This goes to my point about he could just be a lucky general, because it's not that there hasn't been lots of really good hard work going on. It has. Is it all going to come to fruition and allow him to make some good decisions? Let's hope so.
Last question about his diary. In theory, Andy Burnham could be Prime Minister a few days before the World Cup final.
I knew this was going to be about the World Cup.
Good, so you prepared then. Would his officials, if you were one of them, advise him to go if England are in the final of the World Cup?
Yes, he and Keir Starmer should go together if England are in the final of the World Cup, because that would be the nice thing to do.
But Keir Starmer was criticised for travelling too much and being out of the country. Is Andy Burnham going to want to make his first thing going to like a nice jolly in America?
If England are in the final of the World Cup, can you imagine what people think if the Prime Minister wasn't bothered about that and didn't go? I think it's much better to go. And also he likes football.
And he can have his first bilat with Trump.
Exactly.
They're handing the trophy over.
He will learn very hard that in everything in the Prime Minister's diary, something that looks like it's going to be a nice experience is not going to be.
That's the classic one, yeah.
The civil service will absolutely put so much around it that they'll suck the joy out of most things.
I'm just picturing it now, like England win 2-1, and he's like, that's amazing. But he's then like, and I'm about to meet Donald Trump for the first time.
Yeah, and then I've got this and that, and I've got to take this decision and see these people and do, He'll be working hard.
Last question. If this all goes amazingly well, and Whitehall is reformed, and the culture of our politics is changed by the arrival of one man and his colleagues who you think are serious people, would you go back in?
Me? No.
Yeah. No, that chapter is over, definitely.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Very clear answer.
I'm not a politician, Adam, so I can just say no.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying yes to us today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.